Morning.
Morning. It's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of making it clear, isn't it? What you should be doing and what you shouldn't.
Was he meant to come here today? I don't know where I'm having so many recruitment.
Ditto, yeah.
I keep sending me candidates. I don't know.
Right. No, I was in a situation where I didn't need people.
Yeah. And it's sort of every day. It's a bit of a candidate.
Someone realised that I was quite happy.
Yeah. Just never give up.
I suppose it's their job.
You want it's in its commission.
Yeah.
flood. I've done that a few times. Yeah. Coastal did it. It was a tsunami of water spread across the desk. And I wanted to pretend this isn't happening. After the council came up with sort of towel was mopping it up in front of me. To see his hand moving, it was just really funny. We just carried on as if nothing happened. It must have looked really odd. I got away with it. The plans adopted now, so
Sometimes you do that.
these things happen, don't they? You know, it's just human.
You don't put it into your laptop keyboard, that's the worst.
Yeah. Yes, my wife discovered that coffee in the laptop don't mix. It was never the same again.
No, Coke isn't good for the mind.
Yeah.
Right, good.
Good morning. Welcome to the hearings which are part of the Northampton Part 2 local plan examination, which is now open. Before we start the sessions, there are a few procedural matters I need to address. We are the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination into the Northampton local plan Part 2. My name is Mark Sturgis, and this is my colleague Philip Lewis. The examination started under plans submitted by the Council, and these hearings will be a structured discussion led by us on matters where we need further information in order to assess the soundness of the plan. We are supported by a Programme Officer, Mr Ian Kemp, who's at the back, who works for us and helps us to ensure the smooth running of the proceedings. I will now ask the participants to introduce themselves for the benefits of those watching on the live stream. So I can start with the Council.
I'm Noreen Banks, Planning Policy Team Leader for West Northamptonshire Council.
Simon Burke, QC, providing legal support to the Council.
Amanda Jacob, Senior Planning Officer, West Northamptonshire.
Paul Everard, Planning Policy and Heritage Manager, West Northamptonshire Council. And I should just add that Chris Ragg, our Transport and Development Manager, he's actually available on call as necessary.
Catherine Sidney from LUC. I prepared the Habitats Regulations Assessment for the Council, and my colleague John Pearson, who did the Sustainability Appraisal.
Ben Aspinall Verdi, Liability Consultants for the Council.
Rachel Wood, Interim Head of Planning and Climate Change Policy at the Council.
Thank you. If I could come to the objectors.
Damien Chadwick, Chadwick Town Planning, representing the Bastion Group, who are promoting land at the Farm, the Green, Hardingstone.
Thank you.
Dr. Roger Rees, Associate Director of VSG Ecology and representing Bastion Group.
Thank you very much. I would like if the Council could just do as they've done on previous days, give us the housekeeping on fire alarms, exits and toilets.
Oh yes, of course, yes. So yes, we're not expecting a fire alarm today, but if there is one, it's the real deal. So basically the thing is to go through that door, and if you're able to go down the stairs, that's fine. If not, there are arrangements for marshalling people through the lifts. And to assemble in front of the ASK building, which is across the road in that direction. In terms of COVID precautions, basically the rule in the building is to wear your mask unless you're seated. And the final thing was...
The facilities.
Oh, the facilities, of course, yes. I forget that every time. Yes, the facilities are downstairs opposite the statue of Spencer Percival.
Thank you, Mr. Everard. There have been 2 rounds of consultation leading up to the submission of the plan, and we'll be taking both representations into account. Our role is to test the soundness of the plan against the tests of soundness in the framework and its compliance with legal requirements. We will do this through focused questions. It is not our role to improve an already sound plan. However, we will make recommendations to ensure that the plan is sound and capable of being adopted. Our questions will be put first to the Council, and we will ask the objectors to respond. If you wish to make a point or ask a question, could you put your name card, I think it is, on end. If you feel we are moving too quickly or have not had a chance to make a point you wish to make, please let us know in this way. However, I would ask that you keep your points concise. Please bear in mind that we will have read all the information that has been submitted. The outcomes that could result are that the plan is sound, the plan could be made sound, the plan is not sound, it is recommended that it is withdrawn. In testing the soundness of the plan, we will not be considering any omission sites, and neither are the policies of the West Northampton Joint Core Strategy subject to this examination. And the Council have confirmed to us that they want us to recommend main modifications to make the plan sound. I'd also like to confirm that the hearings are only one part of the examination process, and that any written submissions carry the same weight as what is presented at the hearing. Finally, we will only take contributions from those around the table. I don't think there are anybody else in the room today. And just to cover a couple of other things off, given favourable timings today, it's likely that we will try and do some site visits between the sessions. We have been obviously looking at sites, as we've been in Northampton for most of the week. And I'd like to acknowledge from the Council and thanks for the table on the planning status that we've received, and where relevant we will try and make reference to that today. So thank you very much for that. That, as far as I'm concerned, are the procedural matters. Mr. Lewis, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Just sitting here listening to the traffic noise, clearly we've got the windows open as part of the COVID precautions, just to remind people to remember to speak up so that you're audible on the webcast, please. That's all. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Burgess.
thank you very much. If we can now move to the matters that we need to consider in this session. This session is obviously about the housing allocations, the specific housing allocations. The first one is policy 42, Greyfriars, and the reference there is LAA 1113. So can I come to the Council first? What I'd like to do is just get the Council to go through the issue that's in the first question there. That's having regard to recommendations of the Northampton Heritage Impact Assessment. Will policy 42 be effective in conserving and enhancing the historic environment?
Thank you, sir. There are 3 key points that need to be taken into consideration. The first one is that the HIA states that the site is disconnected by its surroundings and the roads, therefore leading to a visual and physical separation from the rest of the commercial centre. So it highlights an opportunity to improve this by creating new pedestrian links and public space. The second point is that the site has medium sensitivity to change, giving its setting a primarily urban town centre with a variety of mixed-use types, scales and forms. And they did highlight that we could provide particular attention to the listed buildings in Cheap Street. The third point is that they considered that there is an opportunity to create new access routes, which would create new and active frontages, as this would improve the townscape of the area as a whole and create stronger links between the isolated sites and the rest of the commercial centre. We have taken this on board in Policy 42 and in particular Bullet Point 2. In addition, any proposals that come forward will need to conform to Policy 31 of the plan, and this relates to the protection and enhancement of designated and non-designated heritage assets.
Thank you. Mr. Chadwick, have you got any issues on that one?
So this is of no interest to my clients.
Thank you. And in terms of this one, the council aren't proposing any modifications?
No modifications, no.
Mr. Lewis, have you got? Thank you for that. We'll move on to the next question, which is the one to do with Ransom Road. On this one, we've got a number of sort of supplementary questions. I mean, the first one is the site was originally allocated for 500 houses and reduced to 200. And obviously that's stated in the policy. Could the council just briefly explain the reasons for that?
The capacity figures have been provided by Homes England, and you are right, initially it was 500. When they submitted their representations to the proposed round 1, the proposed round 2, a minimum of, let me just go back on that one. Let me start again. The capacity figures for the site, they were supplied by Homes England. When we prepared the proposed submission round 2, in consultation with Homes England, a minimum of 200 dwellings was considered deliverable. So that was why we added 200 to the consultation document. When that consultation concluded, Homes England revised the capacity back to 500, and this has now been included as a proposed main modification. And that is main modification 6C, not 57, that's been updated.
So the proposed main modification at the moment takes the capacity up to 500.
500, and we did assess this capacity to see if it is a realistic capacity. And what we did was we looked at the information supplied in the Heritage Impact Assessment, and we used in particular figure 6.20, which is currently on page 107 of the HIA. And this area shows where medium to high density residential can be accommodated.
It appears.
And in doing so, we applied. We didn't apply the 150 dwellings per hectare, which is for town centre boundary only, because this site is just outside the town centre boundary, we thought it would be reasonable to apply a 75 dwelling per hectare density, because the site is within close proximity to the town centre. It is very much urban in character, and it is also a brownfield site. If a density of 75 dwellings per hectare is applied to the site, to that area that I referred to, you can get in the region of 450 dwellings. So 500 is considered to be an acceptable estimate.
One of the main issues appears to be the issue of below ground archaeology with this site. And one of the things that we've been giving thought to in order to ensure that the policy is effective is there a need to include within the policy a criteria that requires the submission of an archaeological appraisal in advance of the planning application, so that can inform the layout of the site, in other words, to avoid the areas of the site that have significant below ground archaeological deposits.
Yeah, we have actually proposed the main modification almost to that effect, because at the moment there's no reference to archaeology in the policy, and we have proposed a modification, a main modification, to add a new bullet point to say that prior to the development of the site, further archaeological assessment will be required to inform development and layout of the site. That is how it's currently worded in main modification.
Thanks for that. I presume, Ms. Joe, that Bastion Group are not interested in this one either.
So that's quite correct. Just to pursue the efficient money, that our only interest is in LA, A, L2 or 4,
Okay.
which is Hardingstone. So thank you for your
Thank you.
invitation.
Mr. Lewis.
No comments.
So just for your reference, we've referred to main mod 6A, which is a main mod policy 13. By omission, we failed to reflect the modification also in the site-specific policy, so there'll be a further main modification to align the two to the 500 figure.
Thank you. So again, in terms of Ransom Road, question 77, is there sufficient evidence to respect the potential effect of the proposal on the historic environment due to the allocation of site in advance? I think that's covered by what we just discussed.
Yes, and also we are proposing a main modification to bullet point 1, because the policy as it is read assumes that schemes of over 4 stories would be acceptable. That is not the advice of the HIA. So we are recommending that the bullet point 1 be modified as shown in modification 46.
And that's to
Just to make it clear, we discussed this with Historic England. It is just to clarify that only 2 to 4 story buildings would be permissible in the area.
Thank you. I think that covers my question on 79 as well. So that's been covered because I think we felt there was a lack of clarity on heights within the site. And just from my point of view then on question 8, could you just list those main modifications that apply to this, so we're clear about the main modifications the council proposing at this stage?
The first one is modification 6C, which changes the trajectory from 200 to 500. modification 46, which changes the height reference, and modification 47, which adds in the issue of archaeology.
And 6A was mentioned as well as
Sorry, that was meant to be 6C.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just for the purpose of my note, just go back to the capacity. So the 6C is a main modification to take the site up to capacity of 500.
Yeah.
The council's calculation based upon the density came at 450.
Yeah.
Where would we find the evidence from the council
Well-
that the site should be 500 as opposed to at least 450?
Well, 450, we've used a density of 75 dwellings per
Yes.
hectare, but that is just an estimated density. It could be slightly higher because if it was a town centre site within a town centre boundary, it could go
Okay.
up to 150 dwellings per hectare.
So, yeah, there's also some potential on the red area on the same plan. So the 475 relates just to the beige and yellow
Yes.
area. The heritage impact assessment identifies that there's some scope for low density on the red
Okay.
area, so it's a cautious assumption as to what might come forward on that area as well.
Okay, thank you.
To understand that, you need to look at figure 6.20 of the HIA.
Yeah. That's on page 107.
Yeah.
That's fine enough. I think we'll look at that and we'll respond to our advisory letter in due course.
Okay, then moving on to the next set of questions, which is around policy 44, sites in Tanner Street, Green Street, St Peter's Way and Free School Street, and these are referenced as OA 0167, 0818, 0931 and 1010. The question, I think we're comfortable with the information we've got on question 81, but in terms of question 82, I'd like to explore the allocation of LA 1010 because most of that site appears to be ancient monument. Should the policy be modified and the diagram in the plans be modified to remove the scheduled ancient monument from this allocation, because clearly from the policy wording that is not going to be developed.
Okay. When the HIA was completed, it concluded that the site as a whole has a high sensitivity because of its proximity to Saxon Place complex and several listed buildings. However, it adds that some development could be achieved following careful assessment of any archaeological implications. The inclusion of the SAM within the allocated site gives an opportunity for any developer that will be developing the area to the south of Site 1010 to consider the impact of their development on the heritage assets, including the SAM. We have discussed this with Historic England and they are happy with this approach.
So again, just so I'm clear, in terms of LA 1010, the developable area of the site is that area of sort of
But to the south.
white land,
Yeah.
sort of southeast of the
Yeah.
application. So the developable area of that is actually quite small compared
Yes.
to the whole allocation.
Yes.
Has any work been done on the sort of the viability of development of that on its own?
There is
and the
currently
effect of the ancient one?
there is currently a planning application
Yeah.
on the site, but in terms of the viability, that would have been part of the local plan viability assessment for the whole plan. I think my colleague would be better placed to answer the question on viability.
Mr. Aspen.
The viability will just be assessed as part of genetic typologies. We haven't done any site-specific viability for the typologies.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Lewis, have you got any questions on this?
No, but as with other sites, it will be helpful to know the outcome of the planning application as you
Okay.
Thanks. And then in terms of this one, there are modifications, as I understand it, to this policy. Could you give me those and the sort of reasons for them?
Yeah, the modification relates to the sustainable drainage systems, and we need to include that in the policy to make it more effective. And that is policy modification 49.
Move on then to Quinton Road. I realise we had some discussion about Quinton Road in the previous session. And that was to do with the fact that part of it lies in flood zone 1, flood zone 2, flood zone 3. In view of the Environment Agency's comments then on the likely flood risk of the site and the effect that might happen on the capacity of the floodplain, is the whole of the site deliverable in terms of its housing numbers?
We accept that the whole site might not be deliverable and that the capacity may need to be reduced. We will be working with Environment Agency to look into this matter in a bit more detail, so we can work out a more realistic capacity and a more realistic developable area.
And just sort of following that through, and I know we had a discussion the other day about, again, to do with housing sites, about whether the allocation should be covered by more than just the general development management policies. In view of the flood issues associated with the site, is there a need, or should the policy include, the plan include a site-specific policy in relation to this site in order to deal with the flooding matters? That's something that council would consider.
The council will look into the matter and consider it, yes.
Mr. Lewis, have you got any questions on this? And just to round it off, there's no current proposed modifications of Quinton Road, are there?
No.
The next one, I'm not sure I've got any particular issues with it, but it's the Ransom Road Gateway site, which is LA 0174. This seems to be quite a small site.
It's a small site. It's at the junction of Ransom Road and Toaster Road. It's in a built-up area, and yeah, the heritage issues are limited.
Okay. Which takes us to the farm at Hardingston, LA 0204. The areas we'd, I suppose, like to explore here are really to do with the issues around functioning link land. And in terms of the area that's being identified as potentially functionally linked land, is that, where's the evidence that actually relatively constrained nature of it?
At this point, can I refer you to my colleague Amanda Jacobs?
Yeah.
The original studies were completed by them, and they were conducted for optimal, suboptimal. So the conclusions for this site that in the southern part of the site there is a portion that could be potentially functionally linked land. I guess you guys are probably going to talk a bit later. So far we've signed a statement of common ground with the developers to say that they will avoid development on that area of the site that has been identified as potentially functioning land. But I understand that there have been some further surveys that you've undertaken with regards to overwintering birds on the site. So if it's okay,
Yeah, and before we do that, I mean, it was just, I wanted to sort of explore the functioning of linked land with the council a little bit, and it appears to me that it's quite a small portion of functioning land. There is some arguments that have been put that it wouldn't function as functioning land simply because it wouldn't be used by the birds that it's aimed at because of the potential for predation by domestic pets, for instance, and the lack of open sight lines, so the birds could flee if they were under threat. And I just wanted to get the council's view on that argument before we went to the objectors on that.
yeah, I mean, I've not read your bird surveys, but from the council's point of view, we want to see the evidence, and if the evidence is suggesting that the site isn't functioning land, then we would be content if Natural England were also content with that conclusion. And it could be potentially that portion of the site would need to be omitted for development purposes. So yeah, we would want to look at those studies and obviously be comfortable that Natural England were also comfortable with those conclusions.
Okay. Mr. Lewis.
Yeah, just for question at the moment, we're sort of in a situation where it's unknown that it is functionally linked land. It's identified as potentially functionally linked land, so we have to work on that basis because of the habitats regulations. If it is functionally linked land and if it's going to affect our development, there will need to be some form of mitigation in order to mitigate against that effects elsewhere. Even if that part of the site isn't included in the development, it could still have an effect upon the species that are important to the SBA. So I think there's still some work to do on this, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you found so far. But I think that it's the solution from our point of view to the soundness is how the policy would be framed to allow for to deal with eventualities, because it's difficult to prove negative, I think, for us, and to ensure that Natural England would be happy with the approach taken and what the approach is ultimately consistent with that and habitats regulations. It may not be one that we can form within this examination an absolute answer to, but it might be that a sound policy can be created that allows for the eventualities. It may be that it's decided it's not functionally linked land, end of problem. It might be that it is, but actually the development would affect the operation of a functionally linked land, therefore it needs mitigation. We don't know the answer to those points yet.
What can be
I would hope that Mr. Bousson could actually give the answers to those questions. And in signing the statement to common ground with the council about this land in question, that was like dealt with Brace's approach in terms of if it is, and we can test that it isn't, it's not suitable habitat for the two bird species, and given its current conditions, it wouldn't be. As a backstop, we're happy that it would be protected from any development. It could be open space or whatever it could be, and that's formed the basis of the pre-application discussions we've had with the council, Mr. Everard, and that led to the signing of the statement to common ground. So I think we can satisfy you on that, and at that point I'll shut up. And
I mean, maybe you can. We would need to be satisfied that Natural England, which is government's advisor on nature conservation, are also satisfied. So we would want to see evidence from them after considering the evidence you may be able to provide. So that might get us to that point, but we're in an evidence-led process. And at one end is a policy that allows for eventualities. At the other end is Natural England and ourselves are satisfied with your position that you're proposing may be correct. So we'll see where we end up with that. But there is still more work to be done in terms of the process, because we need to, the council will need to go to Natural England if it wants to move away and modify the policy from what's currently proposed. So, let's interesting to hear what you found so far.
Okay, so I'm Dr. Roger Newsom, Associate Director of PSG Ecology, ornithologist of 30 years experience. I've been involved in EIPs on just these issues in other parts of the country. We've been around the same process, for instance, for Essex, various local authorities there. Exactly the same process, HRA done by LUC, based on desk studies, identifying suitability, gone through the process, come out with policies, have policies which is a mitigation strategy. For Essex they call the rounds rather than the sound. So an approved process gone through, obviously examination, evidence, and become established adopted policy. So looking at the process we are here, going through exactly the same process. So we've looked at the suitability of the land, and obviously our first step is to look at the LUC work. It's a desk study. We're quite happy with the way in which they go about it. It's approved by Natural England. Identified on the potential allocation talked about here that the majority of the land is unsuitable for the two bird species. They like large open fields, very little vegetation on them, and which they feed by sight looking for invertebrates, and they don't want disturbance. Obviously that's one of the reasons why we're here, because they're sensitive to disturbance, otherwise we'll be talking about mitigation and all these other sorts of things. So the LUC-HRA process does this suitability assessment based on a desk study. We follow that up with a suitability assessment based on a site visit. To look at exactly what is the land, what is the extent of existing disturbance, what is the land use, and therefore what is its suitability. So we gather that evidence, which is in addition to the desk study material which you've already got. So site visit made, looking at it, the majority of the land, we review the LUC conclusions, it's unsuitable, it's very tall vegetation, lots of scrub. The particular two bird species can't have access to the ground, have access to invertebrates, they haven't got sidelines because of the amount of scrub and tall vegetation. It's completely unsuitable. The questions come to a small parcel of land just on the edge, a small triangle which is an animal field. So again, site visit. So first thing, presently that land is fallowed, therefore it has got tall vegetation on it, and it's unsuitable at the moment. Obviously, we accept that as it's now a field, it could change, so that cannot be the overriding factor. The overriding factors here are clearly its proximity to existing residential development and its proximity to a public right-of-way or footpath. As has been, I say, the reason why we're here is that these birds are sensitive to access on foot, access for people with dogs. They have what's called a flight escape distance or flight initiation distance. The evidence and the studies which have gone on all around the country where golden barrel lapwing have been looked at in the same sort of situation. So the Essex coast, the Kent coast, the Solent coast, and the fields behind the seawalls where the lapwing and golden plover are, they come out with evidence that this flight initiation, flight escape distance is somewhere between 50 metres and 400 metres. And the evidence varies on whether or not it's a person with a dog which is off the lead, where birds will be flying off at 400 metres away from the person coming around the corner with their dog running around, to occasions where sometimes a person on a horse, where the distance is much shorter because birds don't perceive that as such a risk as a dog off the lead. So flight initiated disturbance, somewhere between 50 and 100 metres. We're looking at a parcel of land with a footpath running alongside with residential accommodation. It means that all of that allocated land is disadvantaged. It's as simple as that. It cannot sustain and cannot support these birds because it's already subject to disturbance. So, what I said, we have not gone on and done winter bird surveys, which have all come out as being unsuitable and unnecessary. We could do them, and we spend a lot of time watching people walking up down the footpath and seeing no lapwing above the path. So we're absolutely certain the evidence based on the suitability of the land means that in this particular case, winter bird surveys are not required. I say that because other policies of other not-documented bands have got this sort of eventuality which says, well, okay, if it goes to the LUC desk study and says that it's suitable habitat, you then need to do bird surveys. We're saying there should be checking between that, which is what we've done, site-based study, look at the site in its own site-specific circumstances. Is it suitable or not? It's not, therefore you don't need to do wintry bird surveys. So we conclude it's quite clear there is no reason for this particular application do which bird surveys. I'm not going to speak up anyone else's land. This particular application is too disturbed, too close to residential property, too small. That's the triangle. The rest of it is just habitat is just completely unsuitable. So that's our conclusion of site visit. So for this allocation, we don't see that there needs to be any further evidence. And it's obviously an actual submission which has been made. We see it very clear that it's unsuitable, it's not functioning land, and therefore the sorts of policies that may apply to other parts of the land are not relevant.
Just so I'm clear then, in terms of the what you refer to as flight disturbance, that the issue there is to do with the actual scale of the land. So the footpath and the housing would already be within 50 and 100 metres of any birds on that site, so they wouldn't use it because they couldn't get a greater distance than that away from existing development or existing disturbance.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So that part of the land is unsuitable because of its proximity to disturbing birds.
Considered the effects on the rest of that sort of arable field then, the development site.
So
would that cause disturbance elsewhere in frontage linked land and then potentially affect the SPA?
I can't comment about other people's allocations.
No, this allocation, the effects of this allocation, if it's what happens in the rest of that field, which this triangle is part of, have you looked at that and you ruled that out and not in frontage linked land? Or you just looked at the allocation?
So what you would have for the small triangle, if you develop that, so I think it's 60 metres wide, it would push your residential boundary 60 metres further.
Yeah.
But the question is, does it push it over other land which is already disturbed or undisturbed? So I would say there's a level of uncertainty what I can tell you because I haven't been around the whole of that area. But given the direction which the footpath goes, which people are going, no, if you push that 60 metre disturbance from residential buildings further out, then no, it's already going out into further disturbed land. Obviously, there's a point where you come, that if you go far enough away, you do get sort of distances, but that's somebody else's land, that's for somebody else to assess.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking about the effects of this proposal, if it's actually increasing the disturbance envelope into the functionally linked land, which is no doubt something Natural England may think about in terms of effects on the SPA. It might affect a small area of potentially functionally linked land. The development itself could have an effect by pushing back that envelope. But looking at the triangle of land, there's development to one side, isn't there, existing at the moment, and then there's a footpath.
Is it allocated?
So I think just to answer your question, it should also be seen, this site should be seen in the context of the Hardingstone Sustainable Urban Extension that has planning permission to the south, and which includes, I've included it as figure 3 on our pre-hearing statement on page 6, and that shows an extract from the Hardingstone Urban Extension Master Plan, and that shows development on a much larger area of what was identified as optimal habitat, and that's been approved as planning permission. And if you get to the site at some point today, you'll see that further south that development is already taking place. There's fencing up. So now we recognise that the northern portion of that urban extension includes sort of parkland, but that would add to the argument against functionally linked land because that's going to invite further use of that area by the public, in addition to the public footpath, in addition to the Brack Mills woodland, which is well used. And again, if you manage to get to the site today, you will see quite a number of people park on the hard standing adjacent to the agricultural building and walk their dogs and walk through that area. And I was there about an hour yesterday and I saw probably about 15 groups of people or individuals walking their dogs in that area. So I think that felt to reinforce our view that this was a tiny area. It wasn't optimal habitat because of its condition. It was close to well-used public footpath, and there's been development approved to the south. And we're also saying that whatever happens, we will keep that free from development as part of any future development. So those sort of 5 layers led us to conclude that we were comfortable that there would be no impact on
Yeah, I wonder what the interaction is with the SUV there. That's interesting. Helpful. Yes. I think really it's the next stage then for us will be to see what Natural England would have to say and whether there can be common ground with Natural England when they've seen the outcome of your surveys and to obviously discuss it with the council.
And you've answered my question, which was just to confirm that the triangle of land that we're talking about would have to be developed. So in terms of Mr Lewis's point about pushing forward that there is some benefit there, but as Mr Lewis also says, we need to ensure that Natural England are comfortable with any modifications that might be made. So can I come back to the council and get the council's reaction to what the discussion you just heard?
Yeah, I think we would need to, we're in the same position, we need to be comfortable that Natural England are comfortable with that course of action, and there would have to be in any agreement modifications to the policy.
The two, assuming we were to find the site sound in principle, and there are probably two routes here. One is a policy that would allow flexibility if Natural England are not convinced at this point in time. The other one is that Natural England are happy therefore the policy can be changed in the way you're seeking. I think that's the two possible outcomes. Either could end up with you being in the position you wish to be, ultimately, if you follow. Just we have to be guided by the evidence and response of Natural England. And if there are changes, obviously they would need to be, the habitats regulation settlement would need to be updated to take that into account as well.
And another thought that occurred to us with this one was, in view of the issue around functionally linked land, whether or not it was another one that might be suitable for a site-specific policy to cover these issues. Along, I mean, it won't need to be as detailed, but along the same sort of lines as the Green to Grey House.
And I've just realised when I was about changes to the policy, and then realising that actually we don't have a site-specific policy for farms, so.
We'll give some thought to that. I mean, maybe the policy 30 is adequate in relation to these issues. No need for site-specific in any event, because that is the belt and braces policy anyway in terms of the habitats regulation effects. And clearly, if a statement of common ground can be agreed with Natural England that they accept that it's not functioning in land, that really should be the end of the matter.
I mean, something did occur to me in relation to the air quality issue, and I've raised it now, we will discuss it in a subsequent week. But there are a number of sites that have fall partly within an air quality management area. Now, that we've been having discussions about the number of, should there be more site-specific policies to actually deal with that, or is it a case of actually making sure the plan makes clear in the text or with an appropriate part of the policy that these things apply. So that may be a way, so it finds expression in the plan, and it may be in relation to the habitats regulations policy. That could be a way of identifying the allocations where that's relevant. It's just something we can give support to. We'll come back to this later in the examination, but just trying to think of a way to...
Just so to help you on that, we have been considering that as well. It may be one way rather than, as it were, individual site-specific allocations would be to asterisk various sites in policy 13 and expand policy 13. So where there is a particular constraint such as flood risk, and the asterisk would say that the indicative capacity is subject to the resolution of the flood risk issue. We could do the same with habitats regulation issue. It would be a simple and straightforward way of dealing with that sort of
and
issue.
also air quality, and so anywhere that if there's a direct effect of something on the site, that could be a way of identifying and then linking through to the joint core strategy policy and the relevant policy for the plan. Just so it finds expression in the plan. We've been for the 1 to 2 and so maybe doing our best to deal with this. And
that's what I say. That's what we've been mulling over, adding asterisks to or asterisks to policy 13, and then perhaps expanding the end of the policy to provide the substance to those asterisks.
Yeah, so maybe we can continue mulling in the next week or so, and then sort of come to a view on our options on that. Just looking for a simple and clear solution to what is, there is a soundness problem there, and it's just a case of what is the best way of addressing it, the most effective way of addressing it.
Thank you. Wanted to just move on this particular site as well. Obviously, we've been discussing the HRA issues in relation to it. Are there any other factors that the council considers might make the site not deliverable or developable as per the definition set out in the framework?
No, we've not identified any factors that would affect its deliverability or developability.
Thank you. And from the developer's point of view, are there any particular issues which give you concern around the deliverability or developability of this site?
None, sir. I think we've always indicated our support for the allocation and the plan. We had promoted a larger site area, we mentioned that in our statement, which was capable of accommodating probably up to 100 dwellings. Only part of it has been proposed to be allocated for 55, and there's a modification proposed to address that issue in terms of the smaller area of the site. But I'm not going to repeat what's in our statement in terms of the deliverability of the whole, or part, or two parts together, and that's been the basis of our discussions at pre-application stage with Mr Everard and his colleagues in development management. I would have hoped to have had something to report today, but I haven't received the responses yet. But there's nothing to suggest that it's not deliverable, and I'd repeat the comments we made earlier, and Dr Buson has made, that this small area of impacts upon the HRA potentially, we don't see that as any obstacle whatsoever.
Thank you. And just to confirm with the council, the capacity of the site is 100, is that correct?
It is 55, not
55.
100.
So just about that's been based upon baseline assessments that we've undertaken and continue to undertake to progress the deliverability of this site as soon as possible.
And can I add that modification 4 will modify that capacity?
And the reason for that modification
Yeah, we initially put 100 in, that was an error.
so that was a straight error. So in terms of 55,
That is for
capacity
the
55.
That is for the site that is currently in the plan.
Thank you. Mr Lewis.
No, I think it's been helpful, thank you.
Thank you. Those are the end of my questions on the farm at Hardingston. That's the LA 0204 site. We want to move on now to the car park, Victoria Street, LA 0598. And can I just get the council to give me the answer to the question that we've already posed, which is, would the proposed allocation be effective in conserving and enhancing the historic environment?
Yes, we consider the proposed allocation to be effective because the site is actually surrounded by built up and taller and modern buildings, and this is an observation that's been made in the HIA. It is very much urban in character. Some of the buildings around it were considered to be bulky and massive in response to its surrounding area. There are limited views to the site at the moment, although they did point out that taller buildings may become apparent if it is viewed from some of the heritage assets, including the Grade 1 listed Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So they suggested that development should consider the existing context of the height surrounding the heritage assets and not compete with them. We therefore consider that policy 31 on the protection and enhancement of designated and non-designated heritage assets, as well as policy 2 on plans placemaking, are sufficient to deal with the conservation, to deal with conserving and enhancing the historic environment in an effective way.
Thank you. I have no further questions on that. Thank you. Mr. Bruce, have you? Okay. Before we reach the end of our questions, we've reached the end of the matters that were meant to be discussed at this session. Before we adjourn the session, is there anything else that anyone would like to say, or any burning questions that popped into your head as we've been discussing the matters?
Can I just make one point? And it's a
Please.
factual error on the statement to common ground, and I forget what the examination reference it is, on the farm green. There was a figure quoted of the small part of the allocated site, the triangle, being 28 metres at its widest, and actually it's 60 metres. I think somebody got the scaling wrong.
It's
And-
exam 30.
And if you get to the site, gentlemen, you'll see that it is. At its widest, it would be much wider than 28. I think 16 is closer. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Point on programming, when we sort of devise a programme, I think to be honest, we were probably expecting there'll be a greater number of participants and a great number of debate, and it will take longer, so apologies for there being a gap between now and the session this afternoon. We've advertised it 2 o'clock, and 2 o'clock it should be. We will go off and do some site visits this morning in the town centre. It's very handy for us to do that. We've been giving some thought to the programme for the second week of hearings, and we've asked Mr. Kemp to just have a think about the programme and the participants, so we can try to really bring forward the matters within development management policies where people want to attend and speak. So we'll deal with those on the Tuesday, and possibly we will try to finish as much of that business as we can. If we need to go to Wednesday, we will, but we may not. Now, from the council point of view, with your team here, if you could advise Mr. Kent on if anyone's had any particular availability, say can't make it on the Tuesday, but can make it on the Wednesday, whatever, we'll need to factor that in. We're just trying to think of making the most efficient use of time. And then if we need to adjust the programme and make it more convenient for people and ourselves, we will do. Okay, so we're giving some thought on that. There's enough time to work this out in the next week or so, and then to notify people. And so we're just try to be as efficient as we can, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, if there's no further points, I'll adjourn the session at 10:36. Thank you very much.
Thank you.